Cheide!
Hello gamers, Matthew here from Grey Army Gaming in lovely Lund, Sweden. For today's episode of A Few Simple Steps, we will be making a snow terrain battle mat. A really easy, simple way to make what I think is very good looking mats for your wargaming play. Let's go ahead and check out the products you need and show you the simple steps to making this happen. Before we dive in here and show you the products you're going to need for this project, I'd just like to show you a general idea of what we are heading for by showing you two mats that we have already made. The first mat you see is something like a grasslands, grassy kind of mat, and you can see we have different sections here like different kinds of tufts of grass, and we use some techniques where we did some scratching with the paint. That's one of the options. The second one over here is more of the dirty roads, kind of, there's some dirt spots here. We did some highlighting along the edges in yellow. Similar techniques. We're gonna follow more or less the technique we use in this mat when we go ahead with our snow mat for today. Important now is to find a design you like and get your supplies ready and go ahead and start it out. Okay, let's get our supplies in order, what we're going to need for this project. First of all, we're going to need a bed sheet. That's what I've used for all of my mats and it works really well. In this case, we're going to use a blue bed sheet, just a pretty standard large bed sheet. The blue is nice because it will provide us that kind of bluish glow underneath the black and the grays and the whites that we add, which it gives a nice ice effect. So a good blue bed sheet. To start out this project. Then we're going to need, of course, our paints. We're going to use some blacks, some whites, and some grays, and of course we will mix these together here to give us different variations of gray. To apply those then, we are going to use a sponge. You can see here I've used this already on a different mat. It's got some green on it. Get a good sponge with lots of holes, nothing that's too tight, and we're going to be dabbing this on as we go to make our rock effects. And finally, you're going to need some brushes. I would recommend using a bit thicker brush, bigger brush. This blue one right here is good. It'll be good for dry effects. Basically, that's all you need. You're going to have to get out your iron now, and we're going to have to do a little bit of ironing of our sheet first to make sure everything is flat and good. But other than that, you're ready to go. What you want to do though, before you actually start designing anything, is to go and find a good design model that you can use online. And I'll show you an example of that. Here's an example of a design that we found online for another battle mat with snowpack and rocks. We'll try to approximate this as much as possible and use this design as we move forward. The first step now is that you want to lay out your sheet and make sure that you get all of the wrinkles out. If you don't do this, your paint will set in really strange and not very good ways. So go ahead and iron that up and make sure you get all of the wrinkles out. Go ahead and use a lot of steam. The next thing we're going to do now is pull out a pen, and we will begin by basically drawing out the design that we want. So I have my design with me as a model on my computer, and I'm just looking at that design and drawing a rough sketch of where I'm going to have the rocks be. The rocks that we will fill in with our black paint. So you can just go ahead and sketch that out really quickly. We'll cover all this up with paint, so don't worry about getting it perfect. It just has to be pretty rough. Now we'll take our black paint and we'll start by shaking up our paint. Make sure we get all the clumps out and get it well mixed up. Put some on a plate here. I like to have this plate with me and also a little bit of cardboard here that I can use then to do some dry brushing techniques with. We'll take our sponge now and we'll just start to get our sponge a little bit black with some paint and go ahead and dab off the extra there, the excess. And then we're just going to go ahead and take our sponge and we're going to move across the different areas that we have drawn out now. And make sure you vary your techniques, turn your sponge quite a bit to make sure you don't have anything that's too uniform. You don't want any sharp edges. You want to just make sure that it looks fairly random. So we'll just go ahead and keep on dabbing it on and turning our sponge around as we go until we fill up all of these areas that we have drawn with our good black paint. Now we've got some more techniques to try out here. We will try some of the scratching techniques. So you want to get a little bit of black paint on your sponge and then get next to the rocks that we already made with our dabbing and just draw it across the fabric to get a little bit of a dark paint look. And we'll go ahead and do that around all of our different rock croppings. And you can see it gives a nice kind of soft effect. We went ahead and filled in the rest of the blue parts with some light scratching dry brushing as well. Here now we're going to mix up some black and white paint and make ourselves a nice gray that is in between. You may want to do this several times to have different layers of gray. We're just going to do basically one layer of gray. So we'll have black and gray and white. Make sure you get it all mixed up so you don't have any white sticking out or any black that would be uneven. And we'll go ahead now and just get it onto our sponge. And we'll take some of our cardboard once again, or our plate, and just dab it on. And we're going to go now and just apply it now across all of the rocks that we have laid out already with black. So dab off the extra and go ahead and just use the same technique, varying the way you use your sponge so that you don't have anything too uniform. And you can see just filling up all that black space with gray. Next, we're going to get our brush out and do a little dry brushing. Make sure you get your brush nice and dry, and we'll just go along the edge of the black there and just add a little bit of gray to try and soften up the contrast between the blue and the dark there. So a little bit of paint, you don't need a whole lot of paint, but just enough to be able to get that dry brushing effect going. Next, we'll try our white here. So we'll get out our white paint and our sponge and go ahead and do the same exact technique we have done so far. We'll apply the white paint in all the blue areas next to the black and gray stone that we have already done. So go ahead and dab that down. You're going to use a lot of white paint because the blue will end up absorbing a lot of the paint, but feel free to just apply it pretty liberally and all the way up to the stone. Just get it so it is a pretty nice cover. We'll go back later and add a final layer of white. And now what we can do is take a little bit of white, kind of almost a dry brush technique, and we're going to add it to the top of the stones to give it that effect as if snow had fallen on the rock outcroppings. So same thing, use your same varied technique where you shift your sponge around. And then when you're done with that, go ahead and do a little bit of scratching to add some snowdrift-like effects on the rocks. That looks pretty good, and it has a nice look on top of the stone, so it's not just the sponge. And then go ahead and we will do the same thing that we did before with our dry brushing technique. We'll add a little bit of white along the edges here to try and just soften up the contrast between the dark and the light. So we'll do a little dry brushing here on the edges and make it just a smooth transition between our white fields and the rest. What we're going to do now is go ahead and take a little more paint on your brush, and we're going to just be drawing that paint outward. You can see how we're doing this with the paintbrush, using a lot more paint, so not really dry brushing technique, something in between. And this will give the look of sort of snow drifts, as if they have been blown where the rock croppings stop. So go ahead and draw that white paint outward and give it a nice elongated snowdrift look. And we will go along and add it to the side of the rocks. When your white has now dried, make sure you feel it to make sure everything is dry. The white has been absorbed into that blue. It still has quite a blue tint to it. So we're going to go ahead now and go over one last time with our white. So we'll add a little bit more white to our sponge. And what we want to do now is just go right in the middle, mostly in the middle of the areas, the snowfields, and we will add our final highlights. It's going to really pop now when we have that extra white sticking out. So go ahead and add those highlights, just once again dabbing across really lightly, using some random movements so you don't have too much uniformity, and that will give you a little extra white pop on the high points in your snowfield. That will give it some good contrast to the blues. Your last step now, and this is really important, is we want to take out our iron again and we want to actually set the paints. Now I'm not using fabric paint, so I have to go ahead and do this step. I'm just using simple cheap acrylic paints. And if you do that, what you want to do is make sure you set the paints by applying some heat. So get a nice cloth and lay it down once all your paint is dry. And we're going to go over it really slowly with our iron on high heat. And what this is essentially going to do is melt all of the paints together and really kind of finish it off. And you can take that layer off and you'll feel it's very smooth after you set the paints in. And it's basically all the rough edges are gone. All the paints have been melted together. And here is the mat now finished off with figurines and terrain. And this really turned out well. I'm super happy with how it went. You can see the beautiful snow cover and the stones. It really is a nice setup here. The terrain looks pretty good on it. Let's get a little closer and show you some of the texture. You can see here that the ironing really did a good job of melting all these colors together. It really does look like snow, and the stonework, the stones with snow on top of it, really nice with the grays and the kind of almost bluish tints to it. And the blues pop out from behind the snow there, which is one of the benefits of using that blue sheet. So all in all, I'm very pleased with this project. A very cheap project, like I said, the cost of a couple bottles of paint and a sheet basically, and you can make yourself a beautiful snow terrain board like this one. Well, there you have it, folks. A few simple steps for making inexpensive, but I think pretty good looking battle mats for your war gaming. Now, if you notice, the details on this battle map are pretty generic, which makes it possible for us to create pretty good looking mats because we don't have a lot of specific detail like cobblestone or other things like that that would require a bit more work. We can get by with rocks and snow cover and so forth and make it look pretty decent from far away and even from close up. Using the same technique, I hope in the future to be able to show you a few other battle mats that we will create and to give you a few more techniques for how to make those look very good. Well, thank you for joining us here today at Gray Army Gaming, where Gray can always play.